We found two examples of it now. Chief dignitaries wearing a double crown. The flail, the crook, you find it on the Olmec dignitaries as among the Egyptians. The use of purple, we have found the codex. A codex is recent, Natal Codex, showing pictures of black-skinned as well as red-skinned kings in ancient America. And you look at the nobility, you look at the women, you look at the kings and the priest kings, and you find purple as a symbol, as a signal of their index of their rank, just like among the Egyptians. And there's recently been done a study in purple, the Phoenician thing about purple. Their search for purple, because purple was sacred among the Egyptians, it is emblematic of the power of the gods. And the Phoenicians, in their travels, exhausted most of the purple supplies in the Mediterranean. There is another suggestion of why they should have come to the Americas for this purpose. You look at other ritual scenes. The human-headed bird, ba, is found in Mexico. A bird with a human head. This is in Egypt, and on the Egyptian tombs, and they have a little hole in the tomb with the bird to fly out. You see it duplicated in America. Nowhere else. All these correspondences. How come? How can you explain that these things were not happening before? They have no antecedent. They are complex. They are not just single traits. They are a complex of interlocking parallels. Why should we believe that it took Columbus, who stumbled into the Caribbean, which he called Asia? Do you know Columbus called America India? It wasn't called America, it was called India. That is why we're still calling the Americans Indians. He still called the Native Americans Indians. Columbus had a right theory, which in fact was not new. The Arabs and Africans knew the world was wrong. You look at the globes that Africans used and Arabs used to teach geography. They were all wrong. So only Europeans believed the world was flat, until some of their geniuses were persecuted, proving that it was wrong. That's a fact. You look at the maps, those early maps. You look at the early globes that were used in geography. But the thing, and you find it in Arabic documents in the Moorish period, there was assumption all through that Moorish period that the world was wrong. Columbus wasn't new about that. He was right theoretically. If the world is wrong, you could go far to the west and end up in the east. What he didn't know is that you would need an airplane to do it, not the Santa Maria. So the Santa Maria collided with another continent, and he assumed, do you know that even though Columbus doubted that it was Asia, you know what he did? He sent his notary, Fernando Perez de Luna, among the ships and got every man to sign a document that he was off the continent of Asia. He couldn't take any chances. They spent a lot of money sending him out. He had to find India. He had to find the treasures of Marco Polo, come what may. And he got them to sign a document, and he threatened them. If any man were to say they didn't go to the continent of Asia, or they were not off the continent of Asia, if there were officers, they would be fined 500 maravedis, several months' salary. And if they were common sailors, they would be given 100 lashes and have their tongues cut out. That's in the documents. That's the great discoverer, St. Christopher. When he came back, he was coming back to Spain. A storm blew his ships into Lisbon, Portugal. The Portuguese were rivals of the Spanish. He sat down. My book begins, and that is no fiction. I have researched every word of it. He sat down to dinner with the Portuguese king, King John II. They sat to dinner on March the 9th, Saturday evening, 1493. Rain fell the next day. I know all the details that were put down. King John's queen in Villafranca on the left bank of the Tagus on Monday, I don't know what for. But there in that weekend, on that Saturday and Sunday, there were discussions. And at the dining table, he brought with him 6 Native Americans whom he captured. He was the first man to make slaves out of the Native Americans. And he brought 6 Native Americans with him who fascinated the Portuguese court with the red tint of their skins and their here. These are not the Africoid types who visited. I'm talking about the Native Americans who came across the Bering Straits during the glacial migrations. And he brought these men. And while they were at table, a dish of beans were brought out at the order of King John. And King John beckoned to one of these people with sign language to build with these beans on the table these lands that Columbus said he had discovered. And a chain or necklace of islands was built up, which included various parts of the Caribbean, Cuba, the Lucayes Islands, etc. And when King John saw the massiveness of the discovery, the so-called discovery, because Spain is small compared to the Caribbean. The Caribbean stretches over 1,000 miles of the Atlantic. Some of you don't think so, because you came from it and you think it's pretty small. I'm not talking about small in the sense in which you think of it. I'm talking about its physical size. They were upset because the Portuguese, both King John I and II, had refused to give Columbus permission or support. And now the Spanish were going to rule two worlds. And they were so upset by that they asked Columbus to go back home and argue for a line to be drawn across the world to separate the claims of the two Catholic kingdoms. This was known as the Tordesillas Line. It was signed on June the 4th, 1494, before the discovery of South America by Europeans, before Cabral had got there in 1500. And it was drawn across. The Pope did not give it his blessing until afterwards, but it was drawn in 1494 at the Treaty of Tordesillas, and it includes South America, and they'd never seen it. It includes Brazil, 200 miles of territory from that ocean going right back. And why did the Portuguese do that? They hadn't been there. They were concentrating on the route along Africa up into India because of the strength of knowledge they got from Africans who were aware of a southern land mass, just below the equinoctial line within the same latitudes as Guinea. And Columbus was told about it. Columbus went back to Spain and argued because he was then Prince of the Ocean Sea. He came almost like a king. He was nothing. He argued with the Spanish that they should agree with the Portuguese. Let them draw the line because there's only water within the line. It's only 375 leagues from the Cape Verde, which is 4.5 miles according to Vespucci. Roman miles give it 4, but they give it 4.5, about 1,600 miles. And Columbus said, nothing to worry about. You're not giving anything to the Portuguese. I have traveled twice as many leagues, and I have found no such land, which is true, because Europe is twice as far from America as is Africa. But when Columbus was on his second voyage, a man called Jaime Ferrer appeared in the Spanish court and told Ferdinand and Isabella that Columbus was lying, that he had knowledge from Arabs and Ethiopians. The word Ethiopian was generally used for African, that there was a landmass to the south within the line, that the demarcation line they were drawing up between the Portuguese claims and the claims of the Spanish. And he said a damaging thing. He said, Columbus knows more about this sleeping than I do waking. So when Columbus was sent a letter from the King of Spain, he said, please come home immediately, and I want to know all that you know about this demarcation line. Columbus wrote back to say, I have arthritis and I am too ill to move. And then he said something which was a deliberate lie because he knew it was not true. He said, Cuba is the continent. I have found the continent. I'm no longer among the islands. Cuba is the continent because my ships cannot circumnavigate it. He knew that was not true, because whether his little ships could circumnavigate it or not, the natives had lived there for centuries and had told him so, and he had made this clear to the Chancellor of Aragon months before this missive. So when he came back, they didn't want to hear anything more about colonizing the Caribbean. They wanted to send him to find the southern landmass, so they gave him 6 ships. And he sent 3 ships along on the earlier route, and he sent 3 ships along Africa. And here are the 3 ships coming down into the Cape Verde.